But as mentioned, I'm very excited to welcome to the show Shelley Case, who's the author. It's your fifth book, isn't it, Shelley?
Yes, it is.
Gluten-Free, the Definitive Resource Guide. You're here in town as part of the Canadian Celiac National Conference. This was also the context under which I spoke with Dr. Sheila Crow just a short time ago. She's the president. She's a Canadian, but president of the American Celiac Association. And my understanding is you heard a few things from callers, from texts that I was reading on the air, and you said, oh boy, Jespo needs a myth buster in studio.
Well, thanks for having me on the show. Actually, Dr. Sheila Crow is the president of the American Gastroenterology Association.
Thank you for the fact check.
And she's coming to speak on Saturday at the Canadian Celiac National Conference at the Chateau Louis, and we have a gluten-free food fair there, and the general public can come between 10 and 5 and check out the gluten-free foods. I'll be there. I'm on the Canadian Celiac Association Professional Advisory Council, so we have a lot of things happening on Saturday. But while I'm here in Edmonton, I'm spreading the good news about who should be gluten-free and who doesn't need to be gluten-free, and if you have to go on a gluten-free diet, how can you do it in a healthy way?
It's a huge issue with relevance to a lot of people's lives. There are the people that, hey, you don't have to ask me, or I don't have to prove to you whether or not I have celiac disease. Some people will describe it as the most gut-wrenching, most painful experience they've ever had, and others are making gluten-free decisions based on the perception, anyway, that it's a healthy lifestyle choice. So I guess we need to start there, don't we, by discerning the differences?
Absolutely, because a lot of celebrities and personal trainers and other so-called experts are telling everyone to go gluten-free because it'll cure everything that ails you. But actually, the people that need to be on a gluten-free diet for medical necessity are those with celiac disease, which is a serious autoimmune disorder that affects about 1 in 100 people. And if you have this disease, you must strictly avoid gluten, which is the protein found in the grains wheat, rye, and barley. Now that sounds easy. Just don't eat bread, don't eat pasta. But gluten is found in so many foods, not just the bread and baked products and pastas and cereals, but it's in salad dressings, sauces, soups, even soy sauce is often a mixture of wheat and soy. It can be in chocolates and snack foods. It can be used in burgers and all kinds of foods. So that's why I wrote the book, is to help people figure out what can you eat and what are the things you absolutely have to avoid to stay healthy.
Now, you live with celiac disease yourself.
I do. I have celiac, but it's interesting. I didn't know I had it when I wrote this first edition on the gluten-free diet back in 2001. I've had irritable bowel, migraine headaches, not feeling well. And then I was sharing a room with one of my roommates that had celiac, and we got talking about how she got going. And I said, maybe I should go get checked for celiac because I have all these symptoms. And so I think our listeners today really need to know what are those symptoms, because we did a study with the Canadian Celiac Association, and we found that the average time that it took from someone when they first complained to their doctor till when they got the correct diagnosis was almost 12 years. And so people need to know what are those symptoms, and maybe I should be asking my doctor to get me checked for celiac disease.
Well, Shelley, one of the elements of your appearance today on the show, we want to be an opportunity for listeners to call in and just directly ask you questions. So throughout this conversation, we're going to get to the phone lines. I want to invite you, CHED Nation, right now to call in as soon as right this minute, 780-496-0063, and we'll weave questions from my list and questions from the text line as well as live telephone calls, 780-496-0063. Shelley, let's talk about some of the symptoms. I mean, I'm somewhat gobsmacked to hear that you yourself, with your background, your education, your expertise, didn't even know that you were, do I say you were celiac or you have celiac?
One of the things that we talk to people is that they have, sometimes the symptoms are kind of subtle and they overlap with so many other things. And so I was just thinking it was irritable bowel, and I had some headaches and some hives and some other things. But the symptoms can be in two camps. The first one are the gastrointestinal symptoms. So abdominal pain, bloating, gas, nausea, heartburn, diarrhea, but some people have constipation, or they alternate between diarrhea and constipation, which is why they often are misdiagnosed with irritable bowel syndrome. So those are the gut symptoms. But it's interesting that a lot of people, in spite of gluten damaging the absorptive surface of your small intestinal tract, they can have other symptoms because this is an autoimmune disease. In other words, think about it as if you had the wrong computer chip in the brain. And so what happens is when the person eats gluten, the body thinks, shoot, that's the enemy, so go after, and you get collateral damage all over the body. So you can get other symptoms. For example, chronic fatigue, because you become become anemic, because when the absorptive surfaces of your small intestinal tract are damaged, they're called villi, and when these are damaged by the gluten, even though you're eating all these wonderful foods with nutrients, you're not absorbing your iron, your calcium, and vitamin D. So you can become anemic. You can break bones easily, develop early osteoporosis, bone and joint pain, migraine headaches, canker sores, a skin rash called dermatitis herpetiformis. You can develop a brain fog, mood swings, a neuropathy, which is a numbness and burning and tingling in the extremities, your hands and feet. So all kinds of things. Even it can lead to infertility. So gluten can cause lots of problems for people if they have celiac disease and don't get off of gluten and follow a strict gluten-free diet for life.
We've already got a ton of questions coming in here.
Great.
On the text line to 630-630. A listener here says, for starters, I don't know if you are in tune with like products,
yes.
So you may not, but a listener wants to know if you know this is Michael, a gluten-free bread maker machine. I guess Michael says for people on fixed income in rural areas, it can be too costly to buy store-bought.
Right. There are a number of gluten-free bread machines on the market. They're all quite a little bit different, so you need to just follow the instructions specifically for that. And because the way you make gluten-free bread is a little different, because gluten is that protein that causes the dough to become that nice elastic and sticky, and it allows the air bubbles to be trapped in there so that it allows it to rise. Well, when you don't have that in wheat, when you don't have the wheat, rye, and barley, and you have to use alternative grains like sorghum, gluten-free oats, quinoa, rice, etc., they don't have the gluten there, so they don't act the same way. So that's why a lot of recipes will use a combination of gluten-free flours and other ingredients, or some of them, there's some excellent gluten-free mixes on the market that you can put in the machine or you can make at home in your traditional Mixmaster.
This is, a lot of people are curious to know, I think, more about the diagnosis process. And a listener in Oyen wants to know how you yourself got tested. Is there one definitive test?
Great question. Great question. So we do have a blood screening test. It's called IgA tissue transglutaminase, IgA-TTG. Now, when you go to see your family doctor, they can order this celiac blood test, and they will look to see if you have the antibody to gluten, this tissue transglutaminase substance. And if that's elevated, then the way we make a definitive diagnosis is then we send you for a small intestinal biopsy. Now, it's much better than a colonoscopy. The biopsy, the intestinal biopsy, you fast for 12 hours, they spray a little freezing in the back of your throat, they stick a long tube into your stomach, through your throat, into your stomach, into the first part of the small intestine. They've got a little camera on the end there. They're looking around, and then they snip biopsy samples. They take that back up, and then they look under the lab, under the microscope, to see if those villi are damaged from the gluten. So that's the definitive way to make that diagnosis. So the blood test is helpful, but in about 10% of the cases, it can be falsely negative. So if you get a negative TTG, that doesn't necessarily rule you out for celiac, especially if you have all these symptoms, and you may have a family member that has celiac disease, because it runs in families, 10 to 15% of first-degree relatives. So that would be your mother or father, sister, brother, your siblings. So we really urge people, if they've been diagnosed with celiac, the other family members be screened for celiac.
Howie's listening in from Red Deer, wants me to ask you about Gilbert's syndrome, being misdiagnosed as celiac disease. Is that a thing?
Well, you know what? Just about anything can be misdiagnosed as celiac, because when you think about it, celiac disease is a multi-symptom, multi-system disorder. So it doesn't just affect the gut. It can affect the neurological tissue, the reproductive tissue, the musculoskeletal, the skin and everything. So a lot of times these symptoms overlap with so many other conditions, which is why people are given other diagnoses. So this is why I'm so excited to be on your show today to talk about celiac disease and the gluten-free diet.
Listener says, my brother has celiac disease, wondering if it's hereditary, and wonders what the likelihood would be of other members of the family becoming having celiac or even gluten intolerant?
Great question. As I mentioned, about 10 to 15% risk for celiac disease in the other family members. What's interesting is that, say he got tested for celiac because he has the family member with celiac, and his test came back negative, the blood test. That doesn't necessarily mean that he won't develop celiac disease later in life. In other words, you have to have the genes for celiac disease. It's called HLA-DQ2 and DQ8. So you first have to have the genes, but even if you have the genes, not everybody develops celiac. I mean, you have to be eating gluten and have the genes, but we don't know what that third factor is that's turning the autoimmune switch on. So that's why we say maybe negative now, but if you get, for example, we know during puberty, pregnancy, surgery, some type of stress, you can develop celiac disease at any age. So negative now, you could develop celiac later on. So that's why family members should be aware of those symptoms and just put that on their radar screen.
You can see we're getting questions just across the gamut. It's
morning.
great. People asking about oats. People want to know about beer and wine and liquor.
And we can do all
We're
those.
going to get to all of this with Shelley Case. She's a dietitian, a nutritional expert specifically on celiac disease and the gluten-free diet. She's in town for the Canadian Celiac National Conference. She's the author of Gluten-Free, the Definitive Resource Guide, and we'll put more of your questions as texted into 630 or via the telephone, 780-496-0063, right after these. 11:24 on this Thursday morning. My guest in studio, Shelley Case, a dietitian out of the beautiful city of Regina, Saskatchewan, correct?
Yes, it is. Home of the Riders. Riders, go. New stadium.
Here we go.
Yeah.
We're excited to be hosting the Grey Cup next year. That's pretty exciting.
Yes.
Maybe we'll have a battle royale to see whose
bet.
team gets to represent there. There's always such a strong Riders represent. Actually, across
the
Canada.
entire province
You
is
guys
Rider
are one
fans.
of the most rabid fan bases across any sport.
I'm a very much Rider fan, so I'm sorry for people in Edmonton.
I couldn't tell. Your voice raised 40 decibels when you started talking about your favorite football team. I love it. I love the passion, and you're equally as passionate. It's easy to see about your area of professional expertise as a dietitian, the author of Gluten-Free, the Definitive Resource Guide. If you're just tuning in, Shelley's in town for the Canadian Celiac National Conference. Before we go any further, you told me something in the commercial break that I think is important for people to hear. You told us about this IgA TTG test that people can request from their doctor if they're curious, if they suspect that they might have celiac disease. You said, but you better be careful with your diet before the test.
Absolutely. One of the things about that, these celiac serology blood tests that we do and the biopsy, the small intestinal biopsy, is that it depends that you have to have gluten in your system when those tests are done. If you go on a gluten-free diet and eliminate gluten for 1 or 2 or 3 months, and then you go to the doctor and say, I heard about this celiac, I wonder if I have this, and they go and test you, it can be falsely negative. So it's really key for people not to jump on the gluten-free diet bandwagon until they get tested with that IgA TTG, and then if necessary, then the small intestinal biopsy if that test is positive.
Listener, did I cut you off?
No.
Okay, listener out of Edmonton says, my husband and I planning on having a child. I have celiac disease. He has Crohn's disease. Our question is, how can we give our baby the best start toward a healthy life?
Excellent question. There's been a lot of research going on, including some multi-center trials of people that have celiac disease, and now they are going to have a baby, and they're wondering, should we put the baby on a gluten-free diet? Will that prevent getting celiac disease? So there were some clinical trials done all over the world to see if they delayed gluten completely or delayed the timing of the introduction. How did it relate to breastfeeding? And unfortunately, that clinical trial did not pan out. We thought that breastfeeding and delaying gluten might make a difference, but actually it didn't make a huge difference. What they found is that if you have those genes for celiac disease, then that was the greatest risk factor, and that's something you can't change your genes. But they're doing a lot of research right now looking at what they call the microbiome. That is the bacterial composition of your gut. We all have bacteria in our bodies, some a little bad, but mostly good. And so there's a lot of research looking to see, is that change in the bacterial composition of the gut playing a role in developing celiac disease and other autoimmune diseases? So, for example, antibiotics probiotics, maybe not getting enough fiber in the diet because you don't have the right mix of foods for to have the right healthy bacteria. And there's some pills that people take for ulcers that can actually reduce the acid content of the stomach, but that also can change the pH of your stomach and also the bacterial composition. So the smoking gun, a lot of the research seems to be looking at what's happening in our bacterial composition of the gut. So the only thing they could do is, in this case with the baby, is obviously eat a healthy diet, feed the baby normally, infant feeding guidelines, and then you can check to see if they have the genes, and you would be watching to see whether they would go on to develop celiac. But avoiding gluten won't prevent celiac disease.
Listener here says, based on a previous comment that you made a few minutes ago, says, wait a second, I thought oats are gluten-free.
Great question. I'm very passionate about oats because we grow a lot of oats in Saskatchewan as well as some in Alberta and Manitoba. Oats are usually grown on the same fields previously where there had been wheat, rye, or barley. The farmers rotate their crops. And unfortunately, regular oats that any farmer would be growing on their land are contaminated with wheat, rye, and barley. And so that would not be safe for someone with celiac disease. But the good news is we have a company in Saskatchewan called Avena Foods. They have farmers from Alberta and Saskatchewan and Manitoba that only grow oats, and they rotate their crops with other non-gluten containing crops. So they can use pulses, your chickpeas or lentils, canola, flax, any other crops as long as they're not wheat, rye, and barley. And then they're done in harvested with dedicated equipment and trucked on dedicated trucks, and then they're sent to a dedicated factory a mill where they're processed. So those the ones that have a gluten-free oats on the label, those ones are safe to consume, but not just your regular store-bought oats that just say oats.
We're talking to dietitian Shelley Case. She's the author of Gluten Free, the definitive resource guide. We'll get back to your questions, CHED Nation, some good ones, some very personal ones. That's the whole point. As texted into 630, the headlines are coming right up. We're talking about celiac disease and gluten sensitivities and a gluten-free diet. We're going to get into a whole bunch of different angles because the variety of questions we're receiving on our text line, just fabulous, fascinating for that matter. Shelley Case is our guest here in studio, a dietitian, author of Gluten Free, the definitive resource guide, one who lives with celiac disease herself. I'm reading your bio. You received the Queen Elizabeth Golden Jubilee Medal.
Yes, I did.
Why are you not wearing it right now? I would wear that thing everywhere I went.
Oh, well, I just did no room in the suitcase. I had too many gluten-free foods to cram and jam in my suitcase because sometimes you don't always know if you can get something safe. And when you're running between meetings and different things, I always have gluten-free snack bars, some fruit and nuts and seeds because it's your lifeline because you can't afford to get sick, especially when you're on the road.
Well, these are the things that those of us that are not living with gluten sensitivities, or maybe we don't realize we are, whatever the case is, we're not thinking about because it's not part of our everyday reality. But for people for whom it is, it's obviously the biggest thing on their radar.
It's a game changer, and it's not just, you go out to eat and you think, I'll just have a plain salad and I'll maybe have a steak and a baked potato. However, I go out to eat and I can tell you all kinds of interesting stories. For example, I was at an open kitchen. I could see the chefs and were putting the garlic toast on the grill and to get those nice grill marks on, and then they took it off and slapped my steak that was going on there where the garlic toast was. Well, those crumbs from the bread is enough to make someone sick. Another time I was having pasta and they said, we have gluten-free pasta. I said, did you cook it in the same water that you cook the regular wheat-based pasta? Oh yeah, no problem. We just strain out. I said, no, it is a problem. Using the same tongs to pick up, say, some breaded food that have a few crumbs, or the flipper on the grill where the meat has been cooked, or the fish. Just little bits of gluten can make people really sick. And not everybody reacts. I do. If I get small amounts, I'm really in trouble. But some people don't react, but it's still damaging the lining of your gut. And I think you were saying one of the callers was interested to know.
Yeah,
about,
this was an interesting question.
What was that one about the healing?
Well, it was they were curious to know if this was Sean again in Lloydminster. Sure, appreciate him tuning in. Wonders if diet change could restore the villi and its function.
Absolutely, and that's why the only treatment for celiac disease is a strict gluten-free diet for life. So you have to get all the gluten out of your diet and follow it strictly. So that's why this whole business of cross-contamination. So, for example, say you're sharing a same kitchen with someone and you put your gluten-free bread in the toaster and someone puts their bread in that had been in that same toaster. There's cross-contamination there. The double dipping, say someone butters their bread or takes the peanut butter and puts it back and forth onto their bread. You come along and use the mayo or the peanut butter or the butter. Those little crumbs go onto your gluten-free bread. That's enough to make you sick. But the good news is if you follow this strict gluten-free diet, the villi will begin to heal relatively quickly, especially if you're younger. Children and young adults heal much more quickly. Adults don't. It takes a lot longer. And for some people, if they haven't been diagnosed until in their 50s, 60s, 70s, or 80s, that they take a lot longer to heal and sometimes don't completely heal. But the only thing we have for people right now for this treatment for this disease is a strict, lifelong, gluten-free diet, which is why I wrote my book, Gluten-Free, The Definitive Resource Guide.
These questions, we're going to throw them at you from all angles,
we got
okay,
lots of
Shelley?
time.
Because,
I'm here.
I mean, we're going to, here's an example right now. Listener wonders, should I be concerned about dishwashing detergent?
No, we don't have to worry about that. I mean, the water and everything will take that off. And I know sometimes people are worried about, hairspray and mascara and hand lotions and shampoos and stuff. You have to ingest the gluten. You have to ingest the product, and it has to get into the small intestinal tract. So we really don't worry about topicals. We were concerned maybe about lipstick and lip balms and things like that could have a little gluten in it. I mean, people will look for a gluten-free, but there was a study done where they looked at 32 containers of lipstick in a month, and you still didn't get enough to even be close to being an issue. So don't have to worry so much about the topicals. It's what you ingest, okay?
Well, this is interesting, though, because, and Shelley, I know that you heard our conversation with Dr. Sheila Crow and then subsequent audience feedback, and sometimes it's regrettable that our expert guest has departed and then we're getting feedback because then we go to CHED Nation and say, well, what do you know about this? And a really interesting development as part of that listener feedback was commentary around gluten-free, I think it was either body wash or shampoo. Right. And I went, well, is this even a thing? And a listener called in and said, well, it is really a thing, but it sounds like you're saying topical contact is not.
No, gluten has to enter the intestinal tract. However, I mean, theoretically, if you're not careful, you could swallow some of your shampoo or whatever, and some people can have
You'd
skin.
have to be really not careful.
Yeah. And some people could be very sensitive to the other things that are in cosmetics and topicals. So it's not so much the gluten, it could be something else that they're reacting to.
Now, this is a great question out of Camrose. Listener says, okay, so all this talk about restaurants, etc. What about this extra care and the precautions that are required to deliver a fully gluten-free dining experience? Is that just the cost of doing business that a restaurateur's got to absorb? Or is it seen even as a discriminatory thing if companies directly pass the cost on to customers that are requiring specific things when it comes to gluten-free? I mean, there's kind of an interesting angle here, too. You talk to chefs, and a lot of chefs will say, if someone specifically has celiac disease, we want to know about it. We'll accommodate them as best we can. If somebody's just eating gluten-free as part of a trend, I'm going to be a little bit more hesitant to turn everything upside down to accommodate their request.
It's a double-edged sword. It's the good news. More people are aware of celiac disease and aware of the gluten-free diet. But the bad news is that because so many people are jumping on that diet bandwagon for a lifestyle, for a fad, it's really watering down the seriousness of the message for people like us with celiac disease. And so that's why a lot of restaurants will say, are you allergic? Are you celiac? Are you a little bit sensitive, or just following the diet? And we should talk about this some more.
Okay, we will. Let me get you to throw those headphones on right there, Shelley, because we've got a call here from Mike, who's dialing into 780-496-0063. Can you hear me okay, my voice?
No.
Hi, Mike. What's on your mind?
Hello, Mike.
Hello.
Hi, Mike. You're on the air.
Hi. Sorry about that. Well, I just wanted to make a comment. I've been a celiac for 40 years now. When I was diagnosed, we were called celiac sprues, and there was basically nothing to eat. Became a label reader right away. And one of the things that I learned here in the past, more or less 15 years is it's hereditary as well. Both my kids are celiacs. And it's a challenge. It's absolutely a challenge for all of us. And there's lots of places that are very good about trying to accommodate you, but you have to be so careful. I mean, my son is very much one of the people that if he touches anything, he's leveled for a week. My daughter's asymptomatic, so she's, she can eat something, but it might affect her a little bit, but anything like my son. But yeah, I've gone through the whole gamut of almost the evolution of this happening. People didn't know what it was way back when, and when I was diagnosed, I was 4'6" and 70 pounds in grade 10, and it was very traumatic at that time. I mean, we had, it was to the point where I was in the hospital. They didn't know what was wrong, and they had to do the intestinal biopsy, the whole bit.
Well, it's great it's great that you got diagnosed, and and that your family members have also got diagnosed. And like you say, you can really see how things have evolved and changed over the years. I know I've been a dietitian for 35 years, and I can tell you that when my patients first got diagnosed, we really only had hockey puck bread and some horrible rice cakes, and there wasn't a lot of options. And I mean, it's exciting now to see we have so many more gluten-free products. In my book, I've got over 3,700 listed by categories to help people find if you're looking for a soup or a sauce or a bread or a muffin or pasta or whatever it is. So yes, I'm glad that you phoned in, and I'm glad that you made the comment that it is hard. I mean, we won't sugarcoat this. You have to be on guard 24/7 or else you're flat out. I was eating out at a dinner a couple weeks ago, assured me it was gluten-free. I asked a million questions, went to the kitchen. There still was a mistake somewhere, and I was running to the bathroom the next day. So it does affect your quality of life. But the good news is it's getting better. There's lots of resources, and that's why I tell people with celiac disease to work with a registered dietitian, get a copy of my book, and learn how to do the gluten-free diet safely and in a healthy way. So
Mike, thanks for the call.
You're welcome.
Appreciate it. Thanks for listening to the show. Let's get into that when we come back, Shelley. Some specifics on an effectively gluten-free diet. Gosh, that must be frustrating. You feel like in a restaurant, you've almost got you're a pain in the butt because you have to be.
You do.
You have to be. And then at the same time, there's a tiny little breakdown, like you said, the crumbs left from the garlic bread on the grill get onto your steak. Next thing you know, your life impacted for the next 4, 5, 6 days.
Yeah, it really does. And I mean, a good one was they served me sorbet, and then in the center of the sorbet, they thought, okay, good, we've served her a dessert, but they stuck a cookie in the center of the sorbet. So they sent it back, and I could see the chef, and he just pulled the cookie out, and they sent back the same sorbet. And I said, no, not safe.
Not how it works.
Yeah, but I was lucky to see that.
More of your questions in front of Shelley Case, a dietitian and author of Gluten Free, the definitive resource guide. If you want to call in like Mike did, 780-496-0063. Shelley Case is the dietitian, author of Gluten Free, the definitive resource guide, and we've got a ton of callers right now, Shelley, so we're going to get right to the phones, and I love this. Dan dialed in to 780-496-0063. Let me remember the phone number that I say 100 times a day. Dan, you're a chef. Dan, you there?
How you doing there, Ryan?
Doing well, buddy. What's your question for Shelley?
No, I just wanted to more so just add to the conversation of you guys kind of nailed it right on the head when you said that I find that, like, as a chef, you find a lot of people that are coming into the restaurant and they have gluten intolerances or that are celiac, right? But then there's a lot of people that are adopting this gluten-free diet, and it kind of waters down the urgency of the people who are actually celiac, and it's kind of unfortunate, but obviously as a chef, we do everything we can to kind of accommodate, right,
That's awesome, Dan. I'm thrilled. Anytime we get chefs, I was actually speaking to the local Regina Chef chapter on Monday night, and they wanted to know how they could do it better. And I feel badly for the chefs when someone puts you through all these hoops. You sanitize the grill, and you use clean gloves and clean tongs, etc. And then the next thing you know, the waitress comes back and says, and then we're sending out chocolate cake to them. And you go, really?
Yeah.
And that's what it does to, then they don't take it as serious. But I'm glad that you are excited and interested in anytime we have chefs that want to learn more about gluten-free and how to do it in a food service situation. It's totally different than a home kitchen. There's many similar principles, but you have to be sourcing different ingredients and worrying. And I know on a busy Saturday night in a kitchen that's slammed, I always tell I try to tell people to dine early because the kitchen is really clean at that point. They can have a little more time to be attentive, but 8 o'clock on Saturday night is a little crazy sometimes.
Yeah, I think that's obviously the difference between not to knock on anybody that you've had any bad experiences in the past or anything like that, but I think that's kind of the difference between a good chef and a great chef,
And I'm glad we have a great chef on the line.
Dan, where do you work?
I work at the Renaissance Edmonton International Airport.
Right on.
All right, I'll eat there on my way home.
Well, there you have it, Dan. You just recruited a new customer. I appreciate you listening to the show. Thanks very much. Chris, what's prompted your call?
Hey, guys, how you doing this morning?
Doing well, you?
Good. I've got a son that's gluten intolerant big time, and we're having problems trying to, get a diet for him to help out. 2 questions. Where can I pick up the book?
Okay, it's available in Chapters Indigo stores and online from Chapters Indigo, and my website, Shelley Case, SHELLEYCASE, ShelleyCase.com. You can get more information as well about celiac disease and the gluten-free diet on my website, and then you can pick the book up. But if you're in Edmonton or any of the stores any chapter stores locally.
Perfect. What's your question,
okay.
Chris?
And the second one is, obviously there's got to be some type of enzyme that's not doing its job. Do you follow up on that at all, or try to see what the cause is rather than just trying to maintain a lifestyle?
Well, we know that the cause is that you first have to have the genes for celiac disease, HLA-DQ2 or DQ8. That's the first step. 2, you have to be eating gluten, but the third one is where all the research is going right now, is trying to figure out what is that smoking gun, what's tripping this autoimmune disease to turn on, and the area they're looking at is, as I mentioned earlier, you might not have heard it, was looking at the bacterial composition of the gut and what things might be changing that to make it more leaky and making it sensitive to gluten or other proteins. So we're working on more research, but there are no enzymes right now you can't take these digestive over-the-counter enzymes that claim to cut the gluten or break the gluten down. It's not like Lactaid, where you can digest your lactose. Gluten cannot be digested with those enzymes or supplements. So the only treatment is the gluten-free diet. So thanks so much for your call.
Thanks, Chris.
Hey, appreciate that, guys.
Appreciate it. Yeah, you referenced Lactaid. Interesting. Mark Bohr's listening. He listens in from Salt Lake City every day. Isn't this the best? And Mark says, boy, do I feel for the celiac community. He says, I'm lactose intolerant, and similar to gluten, dairy is pretty much ubiquitous in food these days.
Yes, dairy is in a lot of things. But like I say, the good news is for people with lactose, they can actually tolerate even small amounts or take the supplements to break the lactose down. You can't do that with gluten. Strictly gluten-free diet.
Okay, more with Shelley Case. Your questions will go rapid fire on our return from this break. All right, we've just got 2 minutes left, so we got to go rapid fire with dietitian Shelley Case, author of Gluten Free, the Definitive Resource Guide. A bunch of questions about booze, everything from beer to wine to liquor. Let me just ask you, generally speaking, what do people need to know?
All right, all alcohols, your distilled alcohols, liqueurs, wine, they're gluten-free. Even if you had alcohol that started with a grain like rye whiskey, the distillation process removes the gluten. However, beer is a different story. It's made with barley, a gluten-containing grain, but it's only fermented. It's not distilled, so the protein is still in the beer. Any beer, ale, or lager made with wheat, rye, or barley has to be avoided. But they do have gluten-free beers made
from other grains. I've seen a whole section of it at
but you got to be careful. Some gluten-free beers still have this barley in it, and they make a claim. So cannot have any wheat, rye, or barley, but it can be made with other grains.
Listener says we should be asking why this is affecting more people than ever before. What happened?
Well, we know, as I said, you have to have the genes for celiac disease. You have to be eating gluten, but what's the third factor to turn this autoimmune disease on? And that's where all the research is looking at right now. And if they go to my Twitter handle, Shelley Case, SHELLEYCASE, I just posted yesterday a great article calling The Rise in Celiac Disease Spurs Research. So I think everybody should read that article. It's excellent, and it'll answer a lot more questions than we have time today.
I'm going to mispronounce this, I guarantee it, but Jennifer says I have dermatitis herpetiformis.
Awesome, you pronounced it right.
Okay,
yes.
She says my skin blisters on the elbows and knees. Can someone have this condition without having celiac disease?
Excellent question. The DH, dermatitis herpetiformis, is actually the skin presentation of celiac disease. It just shows up more in the skin because not everybody with celiac disease has the DH.
So she guaranteed has celiac disease.
She has celiac, and even though she might not have any gut symptoms, there's still damage in her gut, and the only treatment for this is a strict gluten-free diet for life to stop the blistery rash and heal her gut.
All right, Shelley Case is going to be taking part in the Canadian Celiac National Conference this Saturday, 10 10 to 5 at the Chateau Louis. You can learn more online. You can follow her on Twitter at Shelley Case, and you can pick up her book, Gluten Free, The Definitive Resource Guide. Shelley, thanks for hanging out.
Thank you so much for giving me this time today to share about gluten-free and celiac disease.
I respect the heck out of someone that's got the passion you do. I love it, and I think we all learned something
I'll come back on the show another time. And
Sounds good.
Sounds like we got lots more
Doors
questions.
wide open.
Thank
we got
you.
to about 15% of the questions. Thank you, CHED Nation, for chiming in. We're back at it tomorrow morning. Stauffer's up next in between the headlines.
The Ryan Jespersen Show, weekday mornings at 9 on 630 CHED.